Hello and welcome back to Parc Fermé Parlay with Kieran Downey. That was an eventful Hungarian Grand Prix, wasn't it? It was a bit wild and a lot of drama. And a lot of that is down to Charles Leclerc. And we will obviously come and speak about him in a minute. Before we kick off, I want to remind everyone that you can now submit your mid-season driver ratings through the link in the description box down below and predictions for the next 10 races. We will be doing 2 special episodes during the summer break for mid-season driver ratings and a special episode for bold predictions for the next 10 races of the season. So make sure to hit the link in the description box and submit your ratings and predictions now. Kicking off the race review with Sauber. And Nico Hülkenberg, who qualified 19th, started 18th, finished 13th. And Gabriel Bortoleto, who qualified 7th, finished 6th. There's 2 things that I will say sort of ruined Hülkenberg's race. One, the team starting him on soft tyres. I don't really understand the call to start him on the softs because it didn't really seem like the right choice. Given that the Hungaroring is high downforce, high grip, the stress on the tyres is incredibly high, and yes, there is, more overtaking opportunities than quite a few of the tracks we have on the calendar. It is still a little bit difficult to overtake on. It's a tyre that degraded pretty quickly, meaning that he had to pit on lap 6 to get off them and change onto a different tyre. And when he emerged from the pits, he was sitting dead last. So it doesn't really seem like the right tyre choice. He also received a 5-second time penalty for a false start, and it was a slam dunk. You could see it on the replays. His car not so much crept forward, more sort of jolted forward, and it was a slam dunk 5 seconds. I thought it might have been more. Not sure why it wasn't 10. However, it was still 5 seconds, and it all but ruined any chance he could have had for scoring any points. His teammate Gabriel Bortoleto also was noted for a false start. That was no further investigation. It didn't even take long for them to sort of throw it out. There is all sorts of sensors and static cameras and everything around the track that can detect a false start. Cameras and angles and everything that we don't even see. And it was thrown out immediately. What I will say for Bortoleto, finishing 6th, an incredible result. Absolutely stellar job from Gabriel Bortoleto. I am loving, I say this all the time, every time there's a good result, I am loving this Sauber renaissance. It's a shame that Hülkenberg didn't finish in the points, but Gabriel Bortoleto, what a drive. He kept his nose clean, he put in some incredible fights, he did an incredible job to defend as long as he did against Max Verstappen, and he also put in an incredible battle against Fernando Alonso, who's his manager and would never have actually let him get past him, but a brilliant drive from Bortoleto. And I do feel a little bit bad for him because he seems to have gotten into this momentum and it's 3 points finishes in 4 races and he's having some good performances and now we're about to go on the summer break. And even he said after the race to Sky Sports, he was like, I kind of wish I could keep racing. The timing of this summer break's not really working for me. It'll probably do him a little bit of good, as it will all the drivers, I have to say, to have a little bit of time off. But he is like, I kind of wish we could just keep racing. I mean, I would love if we could, but I do understand the need for a couple of weeks off. But fantastic result from Gabriel Bortoleto. What a drive. What a driver. Well done, my friend. Next up is Williams, and we have Alex Albon, who qualified 20th, started 19th, finished 15th, and Carlos Sainz, who qualified 13th, finished 14th. Every race weekend, there is a team or a couple of teams or, a couple of drivers that I don't really end up having much written down for because you never bloody see them. And Williams is one of those teams this weekend. They ran a very anonymous race out there. Again, very strange choice from Williams to put both those drivers onto soft tyres. Won't have helped their races at all because, as I said, the deg was so high and they weren't going to get any real length out of them, let's be honest. Early pit stops for both the drivers sort of put them down the order a little bit. As I said, incredibly hard track to get overtaken done on, especially when you have Fernando Alonso holding up the pack, creating a bit of a DRS train. It gets quite difficult out there. Not the result that team would have wanted, and I definitely think that they are probably leading the charge, along with maybe Lewis Hamilton, for the drivers that are most ready for a summer break reset. And I think it's coming at a great time for Williams to be able to take a few weeks to reset, recalibrate, refocus, and come back from Zandvoort onwards with a sort of fresh, renewed energy. God, I'm sounding off the rails here, but just a fresh mindset to go and attack this next half of the season, because it's been a very mixed bag so far, and they will definitely be wanting to try and get some more points and everything on the scoreboards, because it's a very tight fight in that championship right now in the constructors, and there's not much between it at all. And unfortunately, they're on the back of quite a few very poor performances, and it's a shame because, as I said in the quali reaction, there always seems to be something external or out with their control, bad luck, that really hampers these boys. And I don't think there's so much, an external big issue that's caused their problems today. I do think that it was maybe just a little bit of a lack of pace, a wrong tyre to start with, and a quite a tricky track to navigate, especially in traffic, especially in the cooler temps. Next up is V-Carb and Liam Lawson, who qualified 9th, finished 8th, and Isaac Hadjar, who qualified 10th, finished 11th. I think it was a good choice from Racing Bulls to stick both those drivers on hard tyres to begin with, sort of elongate that first stint, try and gain some track position that way, hopefully open up a little bit of a gap, pit, not lose so many positions when you come out of the pits. Unfortunately for Hadjar, he did get some, I was about to say some damage, but he did get an injury in the opening stages of the race. He picked up some gravel from Oliver Bearman in front of him, and he got some damage. I keep saying damage like he's a machine. He got an injury to his hands, which he doesn't blame for his poor performance, but I definitely don't think it would have helped overall him driving this 70 laps with pain and everything in his hands. An unfortunate result for Hadjar, who seems to have struggled these past few weekends. Hopefully, again, with a bit of a break in the summer, he can come back fighting with a renewed, I was going to say energy again, Jesus, Kieran, just a renewed focus, fresh mindset. Let's go with that. For Liam Lawson, fantastic result. I've not got a massive amount to say for Lawson, just other than the fact that it's good to see him scoring points. I've said this quite a few times now, but it's definitely looking like he's found a bit of confidence back in himself in the car after a quite tumultuous start to the year. And I'm very glad to see him back scoring points. I think it was a decent weekend all around for Lawson. Good qualifying, good race, good points. Well done, Lawson. Next up, we have Haas and Esteban Ocon, who qualified 18th, started 17th, finished 16th, and Ollie Bearman, who qualified 11th, did not finish. Both the drivers started on the mediums, and it was quite an early pit stop, I think, for Esteban Ocon. And I think what happened with Ocon is maybe the same sort of thing that happened with Verstappen, an early pit stop, not having a lot of the other teams going for an early pit stop, kind of put him out of position. He then went on the one stop. It was a bold strategy, I would say, for Haas to put Ocon onto the one stop. He pitted early, he managed to gain some track position through everyone else pitting, but they then ended up with a bit of a tyre offset. So when it came to it, he really couldn't put a defence in and slowly just started losing positions in that latter quarter of the race from sort of lap 40, 45 onwards. But yeah, a bold strategy from Haas that didn't really pay off for him. Fortunately for Ollie Bearman, he ended up picking up some floor damage. Not quite too sure where, but he did end up losing a lot of grip through it and was forced to retire the car. And that's all she wrote for Oliver Bearman. Next up, we have Alpine with Pierre Gasly, who qualified 17th, started 16th, finished 19th, and Franco Colapinto, who qualified 14th, finished 18th. Their race really sort of fell apart in that opening lap. They went from Colapinto sitting P14 and Gasly 17th to Colapinto sitting 18th and Gasly 19th. They then got stuck in one huge DRS train from Alonso in 5th right the way down to Tsunoda, who was sitting in 19th, 20th. Which unfortunately meant that when they took their pit stops, they were out at the back. They had so much traffic to fight through, and it was just a real struggle. Again, as I said, this track's not the easiest to overtake on. Gasly does sort of manage to fight his way up the order through other people pitting, through some on-track battles, and then he gets a 10-second time penalty for causing a collision with Carlos Sainz, which just shunted him right back down the order. It was a slam dunk penalty as well. It was Sainz's corner. Gasly didn't give him the room, and as I said, it ended up causing a bit of a collision, which Gasly was penalised for. Colapinto, on the other hand, just had zero pace. It's actually becoming a bit boring talking about the lack of performance within Colapinto. And I understand it's not the best car and all this kind of stuff that we've said before, but Colapinto was brought in to replace Doohan on the premise that he would perform better. Briatore only wanted three things: don't crash, drive fast, score points. And I said it before, he's done none of those three things. So, Alpine have kind of opened a can of worms here for themselves, because they've replaced a driver who wasn't performing well. And listen, Doohan wasn't performing the best. However, I've said it, I don't think we give them enough time. We've replaced him with Colapinto, who's also not performing. What is Alpine going to do? Because whatever they do, they're in the wrong. They're going to be seen as in the wrong. If they replace Colapinto, they're not giving him a chance, and there you have it. If they don't replace him, he's been given way more of a chance than Jack Doohan ever got, and it's very clear that Briatore is just not a big fan of Jack Doohan. I don't know what Alpine are going to do with the whole Colapinto situation, because fair enough, if both drivers aren't scoring points, it's obviously not great. But when Gasly has consistently, maybe not the most consistent, but has been scoring some points, and Colapinto has scored nothing, they can't afford to just only have one driver every so often scoring points. And when other teams that have been struggling are improving, like Haas, like Sauber, Aston Martin, they're finding performance, they're scoring points fairly regularly, and Alpine seems to be going backwards. They're sitting at the bottom of the standings. This is not where anyone really expected Alpine to be, and I can't imagine Briatore's happy, but what are they going to do? It just seems that they are going to finish at the bottom of the standings, and it is all their own fault. And you could say that, listen, Jack Doohan may not have gotten any better and wouldn't be scoring any points. We'll never know. But they have, at this rate, just swapped out a driver who wasn't scoring points for another driver who's not scoring points. And there is everything to say that when we come to the next bit of the season, from Zandvoort to Abu Dhabi, or maybe the race just after Zandvoort, that's when Colapinto came in to replace Sargent at Williams. These are tracks he's raced on before in an F1 car. Maybe there's a chance he could score some points, but it just doesn't look likely. Next up is Aston Martin, and Lance Stroll, who qualified 6th, finished 7th, and Fernando Alonso, who qualified 5th, finished 5th. I don't have masses to say about Aston Martin. It's because they ran a bloody good race. Incredible result for Stroll, for Fernando, and for the team as a whole. Off the back of a decent qualifying, a decent start to the race, but an incredibly smart race. They knew when to fight, when not to fight, who their fight was with. Alonso wasn't really going to start fighting with Leclerc and Norris, Piastri, maybe even Russell, because it just wasn't his fight. He knew he couldn't keep those cars behind them, and it was only a matter of time that they were going to overtake him. He knew that he could, however, keep the likes of Bortoleto, Verstappen, Lawson behind him. It's the same as Lance Stroll. He knew when to pick a fight, who to pick a fight with. There's some fantastic battles out there, some great defending, especially from Alonso, defending against Bortoleto. I mean, there was no chance he was going to let Bortoleto go past him, let's be honest. But a fantastic result for Aston Martin. Again, another team. And again, I think they did a pretty good job on the strategy, knowing exactly when to bring them in, putting Stroll on a one-stop. I think it was all just a very well done race by Aston Martin, and a great drive from both of those drivers, and a whole load of points in the bag in the constructors when a lot of their closest rivals didn't really score points. Sauber had Bortoleto finishing 6th, but that was only one driver. Both the Alpines didn't score points. Both Williams didn't. Only Lawson did it. VCarb, their closest rivals, they've managed to get some good points in the bag when their rivals haven't. Fernando Alonso, as I said, also holding up, 3/4, 2/3 of the pack, creating a huge DRS train from P5 all the way down to P19, which inadvertently helped the front runners. We'll come and talk about that when we talk about them later, but I think he played an incredibly smart race by holding up the pack as much as he did. Anyone that tried to get an undercut done, anyone that pitted behind him, it forced them out into a whole load of traffic, thus almost kind of ruining their chances of a decent finish, because they were going to have to fight through so many cars. And a lot of Alonso choosing not to try and fight to get any higher is he knows and he's very aware that P5 is the ceiling of that car. It's not going to get any higher than that. They can't challenge the McLarens or even really the Mercedes or the Ferrari when it's in a decent working window. He knows that this is P5 is the best he can do, and if he can sit at P5 and retain P5, he's happy. He said it even after the race. He's like, this is the best that this car can do. You know, it could have been a bit better. Somebody told me that the McLarens got a bit close together. That would have been amazing. But this is the performance ceiling of this car. It's not going to get better than that for us. And to be honest with you, it's a fantastic result regardless. All right, next up is Mercedes, and Kimi Antonelli, who qualified 15th, finished 10th, and George Russell, who qualified 4th, finished 3rd. It's nice to see Kimi Antonelli back in the points, albeit it's, P10 and it's a point, but still better than finishing outside the points, and thankfully, after a string of very poor weekends, he's managed to score a point. I'm trying to see the good in this. Managed to climb up 5 positions. He ran a fairly anonymous race, got some decent overtakes in, however, obviously managed to make up those 5 places. Hopefully this is the beginning of him turning it around. I feel like he might have lost a little bit of confidence. Who was it? There was a report the other day that said Helmut Marko had been speaking to Antonelli at a hotel somewhere where everyone had been staying, and Antonelli had apparently told Marko that he has no confidence in the car, in the Mercedes. It's an interesting one, to be honest with you, because I can't imagine telling Helmut Marko that. He's not exactly somebody I would go and confide in, especially if I drove for Mercedes. I don't know, take that with a pinch of salt, I would say, because Marko has been known he likes to stir the pot a little bit. Hopefully, this summer break, Antonelli can sort of go away, get a bit of a reset on the go, and come back from Zandvoort onwards with a bit of a refreshed mentality, because I do think that after a string of fairly bad performances, he's probably knocked his confidence a little bit. And I do think that he's maybe let a sort of, as I said, a string of bad performances really sort of get to him, and I do think it'll have affected his performance, but hopefully with a bit of a reset and a refresh, he can come back and sort of go and attack this final half of the season. There's obviously been some big changes and stuff to the Mercedes, them opting for an old suspension because the new one wasn't working. He's had some reliability issues out there, and yeah, I feel really bad for him, and I do hope that this is the beginning of him sort of getting back up into the points positions, because it's a shame that it's not been the season that we expected for him. So far, still 10 races, like time to turn it round. I do just hope, however, that he does manage to turn it around, and these, this sort of string of bad performances and this sort of negativity and everything doesn't become the defining part of his rookie season. George Russell, I think, did a bloody brilliant drive. What a result for Russell. I did not expect him to be on the podium today, to be quite honest with you. Absolutely not. I think he played a bloody blinder out there. He had a brilliant start to the race, managed to gain a couple of positions, then he sort of dropped back a little bit, and it kind of thought, okay, the performance is wearing off slightly. But he was just a little bit of a silent assassin up until he was shouting over the radio about Charles Leclerc. But he did just kind of sort of bide his time, and it definitely felt like as the track was getting cooler, the temperatures were getting cooler, he was managing to eke out a little bit more performance in the Mercedes. Couple that with the fact that Leclerc did have a bit of a chassis issue, come on and talk about that in a minute, it all sort of worked in his favour. The race really sort of came to him to get him onto that podium, and I think it's a brilliant result for George Russell. We've not seen him on a podium for a while. He was really consistent at the start of the year with these podiums. And I thought, my God, Mr. Russell, podiums and top 5 finishes very consistently. And then that kind of dropped off. He suffered with some reliability problems with the Mercedes. And now, an absolutely brilliant result from him. Well done. And he's even said today he's not, there's no chance of them fighting for the championship and everything like that. What they can fight for, however, is the best of the rest, which is basically anything that's not a McLaren. Anything from that downwards definitely seems to be the best of the rest. Ferrari sitting P2, they're right now the best of the rest. There's no way they're going to be able to catch them. So there is definitely a fight within the constructors between Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes. And there's definitely a fight, I would say, for third at the moment between Verstappen, Russell and Leclerc. I think that there's a battle for first between the two McLaren boys and then a battle for third happening right now out there on track. Yeah, it's a fantastic result from George Russell to get P3 in a podium, and it's just nice to see Kimi Antonelli back in the points. Next up is Red Bull, and Yuki Tsunoda, who qualified 16th, started from the pit lane, finished 17th, and Max Verstappen, who qualified 8th, finished 9th. By Red Bull standards, that was an absolute shocker of a race. We'll start with Tsunoda. He started from the pit lane. The team broke Parc Fermé to change PU components, and the RB21 also had brake cooling configuration changes. Tsunoda was really just fighting a losing battle right from the get-go. Poor qualifying, pit lane start, and then during the race, the Red Bull just had zero pace. But it's not a surprise because it's had absolutely no pace the entire weekend. It has been about a second or so off the pace, and it's just not what they would be wanting, especially when the field is so tight. But there was just not a hope in hell for Tsunoda to try and get anywhere near a point, not even to try and get a look in at scoring points. He's having a pretty poor time at Red Bull, let's be honest. But I mean, at least this weekend there wasn't the vain hope that he might be able to score some points after a decent qualifying, only for the team to ruin his race, like last weekend in Belgium. So I guess we can, we were prepared for this bad result from Tsunoda. Max Verstappen's result is an interesting one because the team took a very big gamble. As I said, this is a team that is struggling out there at the moment. This is a car that had zero pace around this track. The team pitted Max very early in the hopes that it would sort of trigger some other pit stops from the other teams. Didn't really work out that way because Verstappen pitted and nobody else did. That then forced Verstappen out into traffic that he really couldn't afford to be in. Because he had no pace, he's in the dirty air and he can't get past anyone, really. It took him a long time to start making moves, and he came over the radio, he was complaining, he was like, guys, you have screwed me over here. This was massively the wrong call to pit me when we did. I'm in traffic, I can't get anywhere, I can't do anything. And the team knew they made the wrong call. GP came over and was like, yep, we're kind of looking at it. We think we might stick you on a one stop now. And Max is like, well, it's going to be difficult. You pitted me so early that, I'm going to really struggle on these tyres. It just wasn't the right call. The team knew it, Max knew it, and it damaged his race massively. He then had a very aggressive move on Lewis Hamilton, which I'm surprised didn't get him a penalty. To be quite frank, it definitely looked... it was quite hard to see because the trees and everything were in the way when we were looking at the replays, but it definitely looked like Max had forced them off the track. It was coming into turn 4. Max went for the overtake on the inside. Not really a point of the track that you would look to do said overtake. However, Max plays by his own rules. That's what he did. It wasn't Max's corner. His front axle wasn't alongside or ahead of Lewis's front axle. And it did seem that he'd forced Lewis off the track. It went to the stewards. They investigated it after the session. No further action. Lewis didn't even attend the meeting with the stewards, and a Ferrari rep had said that it was Lewis that went wide. The rep for Ferrari said that Lewis chose not to stay on the track, and Verstappen had said that he then ended up using more track than what he would have done because Hamilton went so wide. So then Verstappen just decided to use a bit more of the track to get it done. Therefore, no further action. What I will say is you can usually read the FIA like a playbook, and half the time they don't even care about these sort of circumstances. They would just penalise you anyway, This looks like you forced another driver off the track, boom, here you are, 10 seconds. So the fact that they actually listened to Hamilton is quite impressive, because usually, as I said, they would just slam dunk slap a penalty on anyone. That being said, regardless of whether Lewis chose to leave the track or not, it was a very aggressive and very feisty move from Verstappen through turn 4 to get an overtake done. You could tell that he was frustrated and he was driving with a little bit of anger due to the situation that he was in, that the team pitted him so early and then he was stuck in all this traffic outside of the points for quite a bit of the time. Speaking of drivers who drove in anger and frustration, Ferrari. Charles Leclerc, who qualified first, finished 4th, and Lewis Hamilton, who qualified 12th, finished 12th. Hamilton started on the hard tyres. He did lose out initially to quite a few of the soft runners, purely because, and it was fairly evident by Piastri going on to the hards later, the hard tyre was very hard to get into the working window. It took a little bit of time before the tyre really started working properly, a little bit longer than what we would have expected at other tracks. That being said, as the tyres began to come to him, as the mediums began to fall off a little bit, he did manage to gain a few positions there, and he did manage to kind of work his way through the pack a little bit. Not to the same result as Belgium last week. I would have loved a points finish for Hamilton, but it just wasn't on the cards, and he's still incredibly down about the whole thing. You know, it's a poor qualifying, coupled with the fact his teammate managed to stick it on pole, and also coupled with the fact that he's, you know, on a string of really bad results. Not so much Belgium, because he just managed to finish in the points, but qualifying and everything's, it's not really been going his way. And I said it in our post-quali reaction that, you know, there's a lot at play here for Lewis Hamilton. It's a new team after 12 years. It's a big change in culture, a big change in how the team operates and works, and how their cars are set up and everything like that. His age will be playing a factor in it as well. There's so many things that are going into why he's probably not performing the way that we would have expected. But there is going to become a crossover point where the expectation changes from Lewis Hamilton's going to score some decent points today and have a great time to Lewis is going to really struggle. And I think we're nearing that. You know, he has made this huge move to Ferrari, and he's not done it to be finishing P12 outside the points. He's gone to Ferrari to win that next championship. He's not come there to see out his glory years, not inside the points and really struggling. And it's going to be frustrating for him that he's finishing outside the points. It's frustrating for us watching it happen. And then we see him in these post-quali and post-race interviews in the media pen where he's calling himself useless and Ferrari just need to get another driver and it's not the car, it's just him and all of these things. And I need him just to snap out of it. And I know it's not the easiest thing and it's quite right to say that, but it can't go on like this. They need to figure out what it is that he's not gelling with. Why is he struggling so much? Because I don't understand it, and it doesn't even seem that he understands it. Nobody can seem to say why Hamilton is struggling so much. And everything I've just said about the change of teams after so long and the culture change and the, you know, the way the team works and operates and does all their setups and builds a car and everything is all completely different, and you know, his age is a factor. There's got to be some other stuff as well. It can't just be that. And there will be people that say, well, it is just his age, you know, it's getting older now and that's what happens. But then you look at Alonso, he's 45 and he's finishing P5 in an Aston Martin. And Lewis can't even make it into the points. There has to be something that's causing him to struggle this much. I don't understand why he is struggling so much. Maybe it's a mindset thing. I don't know. And it just seems that even he doesn't know. Nobody can tell us why it's happening. Another driver that decided to stress me out today was Charles Leclerc. I'm actually disappointed in Leclerc. And the reason I'm disappointed in him is because that's not something that usually happens with Leclerc. He doesn't let the frustration get to him, resulting in him driving angry. He doesn't let the frustration get to him and lead him to making silly mistakes. And that's what happened today. He very nearly caused a collision with Russell purely out of frustration. You know, none of us seen Leclerc having the pace in the opening stages that he did. The lights went out and he went for it. He opened up a gap. He looked like it was going to be plain sailing, smooth, cruise his way to a win. And then there did become a little bit of a, ooh, well, is he going there? Because Lando definitely was a thorn in the side of both him and Piastri. And he did obviously end up coming out on top. That being said, it was such a surprise to see Leclerc have the pace he had in that opening stint. And even after the first pit stop, it did seem that it was potentially still on the cards that Leclerc could go and win this. Norris was committing to a one stop. There then became a lot of conversation about when does Leclerc pit? When does he pit so that he has the fresher tyres to be able to go and attack Lando Norris, but not so that he loses out positions to Piastri and can't gain them back? And that's exactly what happened when Ferrari took the bait that McLaren laid out for them. McLaren laid out this lovely bit of bait. It looked like they were going to pit Piastri. Leclerc was then pulled in by Ferrari, Piastri stayed out. Piastri stayed out. Off he went. Ferrari just took the bait that McLaren gave them so easy, and it lost Leclerc track position. And Leclerc was running amazingly. You know, he'd done the first 2 steps perfectly of how to win a Grand Prix. Retain the lead after turn 1 and lap 1. Nail your first pit stop and don't lose track position through the pits. It's just a shame that Ferrari then ended up taking the bait that McLaren gave them. Then everything really fell apart for Leclerc, and it was very confusing because he was coming over the radio complaining about issues. None of us knew what these issues were. None of us could really figure out what the issues were. And he was being very cryptic over the radio, and he was complaining and saying, you know, I know what you guys have done and you should have just left me to it and let me work around this problem. And the frustration and the anger was really beginning to build on him. And none of us could figure out what was going on. He was losing pace so spectacularly. He's allowing himself to get frustrated at this point. Russell's right up behind him. Leclerc moves into turn 1. Russell's over the radio. Oh my God, he's moving under the braking. And you're like, it wasn't that bad, Russell, calm down. And then he does it again. Russell lunges down the inside. Leclerc moves so late to try and cut him off. They nearly collide. And I just sat there looking at the screen thinking, Leclerc, what are you doing? What are you doing? He allowed frustration and anger to get the better of him today. And I'm so surprised by it because it's just not the way Leclerc races. He doesn't allow himself to get wound up like that. And I'm shocked by the whole thing. Anyway, it turns out his frustration and anger was directed at the wrong thing because he thought that the team had done such an aggressive front wing adjustment on the car in the second pit stop, and that's why he was losing pace, when in actual fact he'd picked up some damage to his chassis in lap 40, and that's why he was losing so much pace. I am just quite surprised at Leclerc's outburst. You know, we've seen them before, but they usually feel a little bit in jest. You know, it's the, maybe trying Spanish next time. It's the, let's add that to the words of wisdom. It's never as aggressive as this. And I understand that, there's a lot that has happened with Leclerc and this team, and the frustrations will have built up, but this was pretty bold, and I was not a fan of it. And I know I can obviously say that when I'm sat at home and I'm not the one in the car losing a win that should have been mine, losing pace, getting frustrated and angry, driving it 200 miles an hour, putting my life on the line. But yeah, I just didn't enjoy it, to be honest with you, because it's just not how he goes racing. I'm glad the summer break's coming because I do think he might also need a little bit of a reset. I'm gutted that he couldn't convert his pole even into a podium. I would have happily taken P3 today. Happily, because I knew in the back of my mind, as much as I was saying, yeah, do you know what? If he retains the lead in turn 1, he's going to go win this race. I knew that there was always going to be a fight from the McLarens, and Norris put in a mighty drive today. I would have been happy with P3. And I know some of it's not his fault, it's an issue with the chassis and stuff, but it's just, what a difference a day makes, eh? Leclerc also picked up a 5-second penalty. Thankfully, it didn't affect his standing within the race because there was such a gap to Alonso in P5. His 5-second penalty was for driving erratically when he moved under the braking as George Russell was trying to get the overtake done into turn 1. Again, a deserved penalty, I have to say. It was erratic. There was no need for it, and it's just the result of him driving in anger and frustration. And finally, we have McLaren with Oscar Piastri, who qualified second, finished second, and Lando Norris, who qualified third, finished first. I did expect a good race from Oscar Piastri. All throughout the weekend, he's looked incredibly quick. Even in the qualifying session, he was actually the quickest car, if you look at just the timings across the 3 sessions, by about 1/100th of a second. At the race start, he couldn't really match Leclerc. He was on the dirty side of the track, so couldn't really get a good jump on him. I think Piastri put in an absolutely brilliant fight, considering that the McLaren strategy did sort of favour Norris. What was very interesting to me, out with Piastri actually running a very good race and putting a lot of pressure on Lando right at the end, and I'll talk about that in a second, is the team asking Piastri what he wanted to focus on. What did he want to focus on between fighting for the win of the race from Charles Leclerc or covering off Lando Norris and trying to finish ahead of him? And it was very interesting to hear him say Lando. And that's where you can tell that his mindset has shifted from race wins and everything like that down to the championship. It was just very interesting to hear him coming back over the radio and saying, I don't care about winning the race ahead of Charles Leclerc. I care about covering off Lando. I care about being ahead of Lando. And I just find it so interesting as to when that switch happens for the drivers that are fighting for championships. Yeah, I could go and attack this guy and go for the win of the race, or I can think about this guy behind me who is my championship rival, and all I want to do is finish ahead of him because that means more in the championship than me going and trying to win that race. And unfortunately, as I said, it just didn't really work that way for Piastri because the McLaren pit strategy favoured Norris. It allowed him to go on the one-stop, a superb, tremendous one-stop race from Lando Norris, where Piastri then had to start fighting through the likes of Leclerc and then close a gap to Norris, and then in the final stages of the race, and you could tell that the pressure that Piastri was feeling to try and close that gap and get that overtake done in the final 3 laps did kind of get to him a little bit, because on the penultimate lap coming into turn 1, his best chance at getting a move done on Norris, he locks up his front tyres and very nearly hits Lando Norris. I was up out of my chair whoa! My throat is actually a little bit sore from shouting when that happened. It was so close, and it nearly took both of them out of the race. Imagine if they had collided. Oh, what a drama that would have been. Thankfully, it didn't happen, but you could tell that the pressure was getting to him a little bit, and he went for a big lunge. It was the closest opportunity he could get. He went for the lunge, locked up his front tyres, and it just, ruined his chances from there. But I think it was an incredible battle, and even he came out of the car smiling, he was happy. I think he enjoyed it, to be honest with you. And it's something that we've been teased by McLaren and Zach Brown and everything of, oh, these boys are going to race, and we've been waiting for it because we know what's going to happen. And we've had a couple of small instances, but it's definitely beginning to reach the boiling point. And I think in the next 10 races, we are going to have a big battle between those two where they are fighting side by side for longer than 2 laps, 3 laps. But yeah, fantastic race from Piastri. Would he have managed to get past Lando if he'd not lost his composure? Maybe. But again, coulda, woulda, shoulda, we'll never know. What I will say is I do think Piastri will be asking questions of the team as to how the 2-stop, which was the faster strategy, leaded to him losing the race. The 2-stop is always sort of deemed to be the sort of fastest strategy from lights out to checkered flag. However, there's obviously certain circumstances that lead to a 1-stop being the winner, as we have seen today. But Piastri will be asking those questions to try and understand what happened that lost him that race. And McLaren couldn't put Piastri on a 1-stop. If they put him on a 1-stop, he'd have been a sitting duck for Norris anyway. They had to pit him again. All he cared about was Norris, and the team were like, yeah, you've still got Leclerc in front of you. You're going to have to clear him before you can get to Norris. And Leclerc was kind of a thorn in the side of Piastri. And that's when McLaren decided to lay the bait. Look as if you're going to bring Piastri in. Let Leclerc come in. Keep Piastri out. He's gained track position. Leclerc can't then really get back up to him. It's also just a bit fortunate for him that Leclerc's chassis fell apart. But there you have it. As for Lando Norris, I think, as I said, he drove superbly. It was a tremendous race, and I thought that he'd sort of lost it right at the start. I don't know whether on the run down to turn 1 he missed an upshift or something, but he suddenly had zero momentum and it lost him a couple of positions. He was jumping from side to side. He created a gap that Russell was able to get through, and he braked a lot earlier than the rest of the field. As I said, it lost him a couple of positions. He kind of sat steady for a while and then began to make his way through. He then went on the 1-stop, which I have to say I think was very aggressive from Norris to try and do, but it worked wonderfully for him. And it kind of felt like McLaren had got his strategy all wrong. He didn't pit till lap 32, and around the lap 22 mark, we were all saying, what are you doing? It felt like they'd left him in no man's land and that they were actively ruining his race. Because if they had pitted him then, he would have come out a sort of distant 4th and absolutely ruined his chances of getting getting the race win, but pushing him to lap 32, Norris eking out as much performance on those mediums as he could, switching to the hards and then absolutely sending it in the initial stages with such a great tyre offset that it was easy for him to pick some drivers off. And then as soon as he got in the lead, they couldn't catch him. And even when Piastri got right up behind him, he couldn't make the move stick. But yeah, an absolutely superbly driven race from Lando Norris, a tremendous result, and it's meant that going into the summer break, he is only 9 points, I think, behind Piastri. I think these next 10 races when we come back after the summer break are going to be epic. Not only do we have what is looking to be an incredibly close title fight that looks like it might go all the way down to Abu Dhabi checkered flag. We've got the battle for third between Russell, Leclerc and Verstappen. We've got these battles that are happening in the midfield and the constructors between Haas, Sauber, V-Carb, Williams and, you know, Alpine's there. There's definitely a lot to play for in these next 10 races and I cannot wait. But that is everything from us. It is now the summer break. Don't worry, we will still be back with mid-season driver ratings and some predictions for the rest of the season. Don't forget to submit your ratings and your predictions in the link in the description box down below. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you very soon. Love you. Bye.